Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Glenn Hopper. Glenn is a technology minded CFO with more than 2 decades of experience in finance, accounting, and technology leadership. And he is now director at CFO Aventus Advisory Group. And he is also an author of the Amazon best-selling book, Deep Finance, Corporate Finance in the Information Age, and is pioneering thought leadership focused on the intersection of artificial intelligence and corporate finance. So it would be great to hear his opinion on the topic of risk management and AI. So, Glenn, welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Yeah, great to be here, Boris. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of demystifying finance, demystifying AI in finance, and specifically risk management. I know you created some amazing course on LinkedIn about specifically AI and finance, and also you created. Your company created some AI bots related to specific topics, specific roles in the finance. So we would like to know more about this. But before that, can you explain a little bit about yourself, what your experiences and what you guys at your company are up to these days?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, you covered the background pretty well in your intro, but I always say that I'm I'm a finance person first, but I was a CFO for over 15 years at four different companies, and they were all private equity backed or VC backed, early stage companies, not a lot of resources. And I kind of figured out early on that if I wanted to project the company in the best light and to show them or to show investors, bankers, lenders, whomever, that we had a handle on the business, that I had to be able to create really good financial reporting that was better maybe than I could have with my limited staff. So early on, I started leaning on technology to find ways to be more efficient. And as it's been an amazing quarter century in software development and technology. And so I've found that things that we used to spend half of our time doing, you don't even think about them anymore. It's AP and AR and simple reconciliations. And the field has changed so much. And I think that the role of chief financial officer and certainly in risk management as well have changed so much over this time that now, I mean, the pace has been going very fast, but now with how quickly AI tech is evolving, um, I feel like as I travel around the country and around the world talking to different groups of finance and accounting people, I feel like we're not ready. So I've been very passionate about just getting the word out, and that's the main reason I'm joining you here today. It's I'm not promoting anything other than, hey, we have to understand this and be able to use it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is also a fantastic time for people in the trenches of finance and risk management to know more about AI and how they can implement this new techniques in their day-to-day operation. So let's do a deep dive and discuss how does AI revolutionize traditional finance strategies and reshape investment analysis and finance industry and maybe some risk practices, management practices.
Sure. Okay, so let's talk about AI in two sections. We're going to talk now, which is funny because it's only been mainstream used for 15 years, but I'm going to call it traditional or the AI that we've known up until the last year and a half or so, where generative AI has been really, it's generative AI has captured everyone's imagination and it's the most accessible AI that's been around. But it's still in the very early nascent stages as far as, especially to this audience, they'll understand there's a lot of risk issues with generative AI right now. We all see the potential, but there's a little bit of hesitation on just immediately deploying this for critical elements across the company. So let's put that aside now, generative AI, and let's just look at, this isn't just an overnight occurrence that we've gotten to Gen AI. For the past 15 years, we've been using machine learning, which is a subset of AI, and it's really the one that has gotten us to where we are now. We've been using machine learning for credit approvals, for fraud detection, for forecasting, and basically with this traditional AI, the machine learning, we've been able to supercharge our forecasts, bring in way more parameters or features into our modeling to make predictions for scenario analysis, being able to run Monte Carlo simulations where you simulate scenario analysis 10,000 times for, sort of the good, medium, and worst case scenario. And so I think the tools have been out there. And what's the issue before now is if you're at a large company and have the resources, you had teams who were data scientists and who engineers who could program and develop all this, and you were able to use it. But the rest of the world, there was a locked door between having, the need for all of this and being able to develop and build around it was you had to know Python and SQL and data science to be able to access it. But where we are today with generative AI, the promise of that is your natural language, your spoken language becomes kind of the new coding language. And so people who didn't have access to these traditional ML tools, generative AI will be an interface that lets you just interact with your data just as you would an analyst or another team member. So we've done some amazing stuff with machine learning for years, but it was not accessible to most people. Now everybody's talking about generative AI, and I do see, like, just yesterday, as a matter of fact, Microsoft rolled out another. It was Copilot for finance. So it's generative
Mhm.
AI targeted for a specific, and they're rolling out other ones, and there's startups, and all the big companies are trying to find ways to integrate this into our workflows, and it is going to change things. And when you have big names out there of the software providers from companies that we've used for years, it's a lot more accessible than if we had to try to build something ourselves. So we're still in the very early stages, a lot of promise there, but that's not, generative AI is not the only kind of AI. There's plenty of tools out there that we've been using for 15 years now to really help in whether it's corporate finance or risk management specifically.
Mhm. Mhm. So, of course, for my understanding, if we now are running in this bots, like you said, Microsoft released, maybe in the future we will have accounting bots. So either small, and you are the kind of also entrepreneur, you don't need actually accountant. You can throw all your data, and they can do accounting for you, right? Or it's
Yeah,
still
so
not.
yeah, I mean that's the dream, and we are so to your point on the bots, I've developed about a dozen finance and accounting bots. The first couple that I made were I mentioned Python being a barrier to entry, being able to code. The first couple I made were using programming language, and it took me days and days to make each of them because I'm not the best programmer in the world. I know enough to be dangerous, but and they were pretty good, but they were hard to access, hard to build, and would have required additional skill sets from people who are better programmers to me to make them really production ready. So they were really just like proofs of concept. But then after I'd rolled these out, in the fall, OpenAI rolled out the ability for anyone, whether you can code or not, to create these tools called GPTs, which
Mhm.
are these custom bots. So I went out, and the two that I had built in Python that were the first two that I built using these GPTs. One was an auditor, and the other one was a CFO. And so without any coding, I was able to explain to the GPT in natural language, just this is who you are, this is what you do, this is what your focus is. And then I was able to upload training documents. So finance and accounting textbooks, risk management texts were in there certainly, and just a series of about a dozen or so. And oh, I will say for training these, you you need to be sure you're using open source data or something that you own. Otherwise, you could end up in one of these copyright situations. But Yeah, I went on from the CFO and the auditor. I built an FP&A specialist, an ESG specialist, and several a treasurer and several other accounting and finance functions. And I'll say right now, I mean, there's a big conversation about, oh, AI is going to take our jobs. I mean, these bots that I built, and they're, as good as any others that are out there, but we're not AGI. We're not human level intelligence here. They're
Mhm.
great assistants. You can, in some ways, and I know a lot of people wouldn't want me to say this, but they're almost like supercharged web searching because they're just, they don't have agency on their own. They only respond to questions that you give them. And right now, the response on whether it's you're using Gemini or Claude or Llama or any of the, ChatGPT, any of the models out there, there's still a big trust issue because they're not always right, and
Mhm.
they will give you a wrong answer just as just as confidently as they would a right answer. So I love these tools I've built, but I treat them just as I do working with any of these chatbots. I treat them as if they're a very bright but very inexperienced intern. So
Uh-huh.
you interact with them, you guide them, and then they can shock you with how good their answers are sometimes, and they come up with things that you wouldn't have thought of, or they help. They're really good at aggregating data. So right now, I think we're in kind of proof of concept phase, but there's also a learning phase for people who haven't been exposed to AI and machine learning and all this technology that we need to understand this before we deploy it at scale, and certainly before we're relying on it for critical parts of our workflow and our reporting.
Fantastic. So, what are the key technical complexities involved in integrating AI in the financial institution strategies, and how can this complexity be addressed effectively? You said we have OpenAI now, ChatGPT, Google, Gemini. What are the differences between them? What people in the trenches need to know about this?
Yeah, so a couple of parts to that question. So I think what people need to understand now, and it's a broader discussion than we would cover in the podcast today, but I always say before we can start using this tool, because we're going to be eventually, maybe sooner than later, putting trust in it and offloading duties to it. Um, I don't need to understand how this microphone works to be able to use it. It's a passive, it's just it passes through. I don't need to understand the diodes and whatever's going on behind my computer monitor to understand how the image comes to me to use it. I just use it. I'm a passive recipient of it. But with AI, it's different because if you're going to be relying on it and if you're going to be putting critical and important information into it, you need to understand. I'm not saying you need to be a computer developer or an engineer or a data scientist, but you need a basic concept of how the tool that you're using works. Because otherwise, when you're doing your financial forecasting, I don't know if you remember those magic 8 balls that you would ask a question and shake it up. They were,
Mhm.
and then it would give you an answer. I mean, if you don't know how the answer is being generated, how are you ever going to trust it? So right now, before anyone is going to delve into an AI implementation, um, you need a basic understanding of the technology. And there's, I mean, a million ways they could get it. There's online courses, YouTube videos, books. I mean, we're inundated with information around it right now. So I would say for all of us, regardless of what your position is, you need to read and study on it. I mean, just like when other technologies came around, we needed to understand cloud computing and
Mhm.
desktop computing and the software that we used. And it's going to be incumbent on us to understand this. So step one is just understanding the technology on a deeper level than just typing something into a chatbot and taking the answer at face value. And the other would be, if you're going to implement this, I say there's kind of a matrix where you have items on one end of the spectrum that are very critical, important steps to the business, and they're kind of high risk. And then at the low end of the spectrum, you've got something like social media posts, marketing content, things that are low risk. If the AI gets it wrong, you're not going to sink the company, unless it got it horribly, horribly wrong again. So, you have to evaluate which projects you're going to take on. And I think understanding basic level of what AI is, evaluating the project, picking with these sort of low risk, low hanging fruit,
Mhm.
easier projects to adapt, and then test it out, have a sandbox environment, use artificial data, use artificial situations, and try it out and just learn how to interact with these tools. And once you do all that, then you could start the implementation process and just, pick a small project to work and something that would be easy and non-critical.
Mhm. So, how does this AI-powered predictive analytics contribute to more informed, for example, investment decisions? And what types of data are essential for training such accurate predictive models in finance?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up data because data is the fuel that drives everything here. So if listeners are at a company now where they're not doing anything with AI, but they want to know how they can get into it, the first thing that I would say is you need to increase your data maturity. You need to, if you're living in a situation where all the reports you generate are sort of ad hoc, special request. Someone's going and pulling and dumping data into Excel. And there's not a sort of a culture of data-driven decision making, and you haven't gone through and identified, what your sources of truth are and where the data comes from, then you need to first build up the data that you have because the models are only going to be as good as the data they're trained on. So once you tackle that part, to make an investment decision, um, to make an investment decision, um, you know, the same way that we would model things out in Excel, we have this historical data, we're doing a time series analysis, and you can use AI to make, supercharged analyses. You can do things like, seasonal, auto-regressive, integrated moving average, complex models that a lot of us wouldn't take the time to do in Excel. But with AI, with computer-powered forecasting, you could pull in so many more features. So you could have sort of the historical features of the investment that you're analyzing, but you could also bring in macroeconomic data from, the Federal Reserve and other banking data and other business data outside of yours. Um, and the thing with these models is you can feed them real-time data and have them update in real time, so that you always have the most current version. And uh, machine learning is much better at spotting anomalies and variations and discrepancies and changes in trend than people are. So it's the same stuff that we've done, but we are now able to do it with more data in more real time, and bringing in more factors in our analysis. So, you know, in an investment decision, we've got our risk identification. So AI could go through these massive data sets and identify hidden, emerging, or complex risks that we may not see, by looking at the patterns. And it can predict those future risks based on those data and trends, which is what machine learning does. And um, you know, evaluate risks by integrating and analyzing data from all these different diverse sources. And then here's one that I'm seeing with generative AI, and it is pretty good at this. It you can feed all the data to it, whereas a traditional machine learning model would have just spit out a result. What I was talking about earlier with generative AI, the way that you can chat and interact with your data, once you've loaded all this information in with one of these LLM powered chatbots, you can actually have it suggest, ask it what is the optimal risk mitigation strategy here, and it will give you its opinion. Now, it's just like an analyst, and none of us have a crystal ball, so you take it for what it's worth. But what I've found when I interact, once I load all the data and work with it, when I interact with it in this way, sometimes it's giving me insights and things that I might not have thought about. So whether I take it at face value and just do exactly what it says, or I just say, you know what, this is going to be part of my decision toolkit. Thank you for the tip. I'll take it under advisement with everything else.
All right, all right. So let's discuss a little bit about regulation, ethics, and all this bias thing that we all hear. And I know that in Europe there is now regulation about AI, and I think I'm not sure if there is in the United States, but normally it takes about more a few years for United States to do some regulation and compliance stuff. What do you think about this, and how people should approach this stuff?
Yeah, great question. And here's my concern. The technology is getting so advanced that especially when I think about the US right now, and I don't want to go o- over political, so I won't say anything about either party, but think about the skill set that a lawmaker has and the skill set that a technologist has. And I 100% agree that we need regulations. And even the leaders of these software companies would say the same. But my concern is who is setting these regulations? And it's a little scary if people who don't understand the technology are the ones who are setting the regulations. I think about in the US years ago, there was a senator from Alaska who was getting up in years, and somebody asked him a question about the internet, and he described it as a series of pipes and tubes. And I thought, this is exactly, I mean, this is not the person I want writing policy and regulation around technology. So I don't. That's still got to be solved for, and I think globally this is being considered. There are many who say we're already too slow, we don't have regulations in place, and it's the technology is outpacing the regulations, and that's a valid argument as well. But if you think about what we need to regulate, certainly there's the implications around hate speech and bias in the models, and we need to address all that. And there's, the software developers have put guardrails around to try to keep it from going off the rails and telling you things like how to hotwire a car or how to make a bomb or anything that, anything negative. So that's some kind of self-regulation, but the dangers of when you can create misinformation at scale, orders of magnitude higher than what we were, than what we were able to do before. That is a serious concern. And so we could talk about it at the sort of global compliance level, but narrowing it down to finance, I think about things like SOC 2 compliance, where if we're going to be using this system, you can't just to to be auditable, you can't just say, I dumped all the data into this machine, it worked some magic on it and spit out the result, and I use that result. You have to be able to, it has to be explainable AI. And the more complex these models get, this sort of, you've heard the term black box on artificial intelligence models. You can't just say, I stuck it into the magic machine, I shook up my magic 8 ball and got this response, so I'm using it. So you have to have explainable and repeatable and results that come out of it. So we need to figure that out. And is I'm the biggest AI advocate out there, but you probably heard hesitance in my voice earlier when I was talking about using in business um, generative AI right now, just because I'm not ready to trust it. We're maybe at trust but verify, but maybe I'm not even sure I'm ready to say I almost trust, and I'm definitely gonna verify it at this point. So thinking about compliance, it's if we can't understand it, we shouldn't be using it. And regulatory requirements, I think, are a little behind right now. Um, and we're going to need to address that going forward. And it's going to take people smarter than I am to figure out how to how to put all this together.
Mhm. All right. So I would like to ask you a personal point of view. For example, what are the major misconception in the AI in the finance space that you strongly disagree with?
Yeah, so I guess two things. The first one's kind of easy, and I hear this a lot and I think it comes from people not understanding how the technology works. Is the question of, this thing almost seems sentient. I don't understand. How is it giving me these responses? And I asked it if it had feelings, and it said it did, or these sort of hallucinations that these chat powered or that these LLM powered chatbots can get. So that's a concern. But I think that the beyond that, getting to a level of trust with the data is going to be important. And um, so, there's, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to say this succinctly, but if you, well, I guess I'll just say it like this. Right now, generative AI is not going to take anyone's jobs. It has too many issues with it. But I see people that just identify the negative and the shortcoming of it. So they throw up their hands and say, that's never going to be able to do what I am. And that's the fear and what I for companies, because it's right now, it's not AI versus humans. It's humans using AI versus those who don't. And we're still on the bleeding edge of it, but I think that the wrong approach would be to just say it's not ready for prime time. I'm not going to pay attention to it. So the biggest pushback I would say is I will agree with you that this is not ready for prime time today, but the technology is coming so fast. And if you are standing still and not, you're either going to ride the wave of this technology or you're going to be subsumed and drowned by it.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, yeah, we discussed this. I just wanted to ask you what risk managers should start prioritizing right now. But I think you already you already said that they have sort of start learning the systems, and maybe in a few years they can actually have a core partner with their work. So let's just summarize our interview for someone who is listening to it and would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways. What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest takeaway right now is this is transformative. The introduction of generative AI. We're still in the very early stages of it, but this is going to be as significant as electricity, as the internet. And I stand by that. I know we're at the top of the Gartner hype cycle on this right now, but there's a reason for it, and we're seeing the power of it. So it's going to be transformative. We can't ignore it. Um, we know it's coming, so let's do what we can to prepare for it because we're going to see enhanced decision making, improved efficiency, and uh, really better tools to predict and mitigate risks in the very near future with these tools, even if they're not 100% ready for prime time now. So it's on us. And I guess the last thing I would say is I understand that we didn't want to be computer scientists and engineers, and we don't have to do that, but we do have to adapt and evolve and understand this technology because it's here and we're going to have to be able to harness it.
All right, Glenn, thank you very much. That's all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you something that you would feel important for our audience, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think we covered everything that I was thinking about. I mean, I really, if you kind of, I guess for the audience here, think about what you do as a risk manager. Think about, from risk identification and analysis and assessment and evaluation, and then coming up with your risk management strategy and, coming with the plans around risk management and and monitoring what's going on. And I think that would be a great scenario. Maybe some homework to go away with is come up with a fictional idea of something that you would consider when you were doing your risk evaluation and plug it into one of the Gemini or GPT or whatever. Plug it in and just interact with it. If you haven't interacted with this tool before, that's a simple scenario you can do. And you may come back and say, "Oh, this thing's an idiot," or you might say, "Oh, I see the potential here." And it's either one of those is equally as likely.
Are there some kind of danger that your data can be exposed to outside world? Or how?
So yes, and actually that's data privacy is a very big concern. So if you're using just the free version that is off the shelf, and you're putting anything in, I always caution people, don't put personally identifiable information in. Just like you wouldn't put a picture of your social security number or driver's license or passport, on the open web. Think of just general security assessment. Now there are tools and there are more there are paid platforms where your data is not, is not used for training, and it's any data that you put anywhere on the internet is at some level of risk, whether it's an AWS storage or on a social network site. It's data that's not locked in a box somewhere is at risk. But so if you're just using the free off-the-shelf software, I would say just use fictional data or public company data to make, that's
Mm.
already out there. But there are, and that we could, that's a whole other show. We could talk about the sort of all the way from enterprise level down to to small, medium-sized businesses. There are tools they can use that will keep that data private and
Oh,
secure.
all right, fantastic. Maybe this is idea for our next interview in a few months, if you want. So, Glenn, thanks again, and I wish you a great success with you and what you do. And hope we can collaborate in the future. And you are very thoughtful, you were skillful in this AI thing that is very important in our future.
Yeah, thank you, Boris. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you again.